Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. Today is this month's patron pick. Thank you so much to all of my wonderful supporters on Patreon. The topic that was chosen this month is judging at Regular REL, and it's one of the topics that have been floating around the voting for several months now, so I'm glad it finally managed to get enough support for a plurality. While competitive REL events are what most people think of as judging, and those opportunities are generally perceived as more prestigious and higher paying, the vast majority of Magic's organized play happens at regular REL. But maybe I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. Let's start off with what regular REL actually means. REL is short for Rules Enforcement Level, which is exactly what it sounds like. Every Magic tournament is run at one of two Rules Enforcement levels that affect what the penalties for making in-game mistakes are going to be. Technically, there's also professional rules enforcement level, but realistically that's so similar to competitive that they might as well be the same thing. Somewhat confusingly, Magic's policy documents don't actually specify any difference in the enforcement of the rules between those two. The only functional differences don't even affect players, but spectators, who are asked to stay out of the aisles at professional REL. They also cannot ask players to pause a match while they get a judge if they notice a potential infraction in a professional REL game. And that's literally the only difference between professional and competitive. And in the fact that there's only a handful of tournaments that are run at professional REL every year, and a lot of judges just totally forget that it even exists. In contrast, judging at regular REL is a very different experience from judging at competitive. If you'd like a full list of all the differences, I actually made a video about that several years ago towards the start of my channel. The production value is a little dated, but the information is still good. For today, I'll go through what goes into judging at regular REL and provide a bit of commentary. Before we even crack into the official policy documents, I want to talk a little bit about the reason why there are different RELs in the first place. So it all breaks down to what I consider one of Magic's greatest strengths, which is that it's not just one game. See, whenever I have a video about policy and philosophy, especially one where I talk about giving out strong penalties like a game loss or the potential for someone to angle shoot or cheat if we don't enforce the rules a certain way, it's very common that I'll see some comments like, "That sounds horrible," or "Why would anyone play like that?" After all, when your goal is to unwind and hang out with friends, both familiar and ones that you haven't met yet, such behavior seems more of an affront to sportsmanship than an unfortunate reality. On the other hand, for a large segment of Magic's audience, playing for thousands of dollars of prizes or a chance at the Pro Tour provides all the fun that they're looking for. The thrill of victory represents the primary allure for these players, and many times their matches dispense with any of the normal pleasantries to devote every ounce of mental capacity to concentrating on the game. Now, whether you see Magic as an intellectually stimulating competition or a medium for social bonding, Magic is for you, and your way of enjoying the game is valid, no matter what people in the other camp say. The problem is that Magic is only fun when all the players in the game are getting the experience that they signed up for. I'm sure we all know what it's like when a sweaty tryhard plays against someone's Commodore Guff quill-themed deck where every card has a feather in the artwork, and the end result isn't what either player had in mind. So that's what rules enforcement levels are all about, trying to deliver a gameplay experience that matches everybody's expectations. It's kind of a more effective version of Commander's bracket system. It doesn't do anything to prevent Commodore Guff from playing in an RCQ or Sweaty Tryhards from playing in a pre-release, but at least it gets everybody on the same page. And when a player is acting in a way that's contrary to that experience, it gives judges or other tournament officials a place to come from to get things back on track. So with that being the case, what does that look like in practice? Well, there's a saying among the judge program that dates back to long before even I started judging that summarizes what judges do at events. Keep it fair, keep it fun. Now that's judging in a nutshell. Everything we do is in service to that ideal. In a perfect world, judges would be keeping it fun and keeping it fair all the time, but unfortunately that's not always possible. Sometimes you have a choice between two options and one of them is more fun than the other, but the other is more fair. Rules enforcement level helps the judge decide which side of our ideal to prioritize at times like this. One of the ways that we see this play out is the guidance given to tournament officials for what to do in cases where a player does something against the rules. This could be the comprehensive rules that govern gameplay or the Magic tournament rules that govern tournament operations. In competitive REL tournaments, the document that gives this guidance is the Infraction Procedure Guide. The most current version of this is 31 pages of fairly technical descriptions of exactly what constitutes each infraction, what the penalty and fix should be, and under what circumstances the penalty should be upgraded. In contrast, the document serving this same purpose for regular REL is just 2 pages long and written in much less formal language. Why is this? Because it's more fair to have specific prescribed processes for handling each infraction so that they're handled the same way from tournament to tournament. But it's more fun to give tournament officials some general guidance on what to do and allowing them the flexibility to take the circumstances of the infraction into account, even if that does mean F&Ms at different stores might handle the same situation in 2 different ways. The overall philosophy of how to handle rule breaking is different too. At regular REL, judges are instructed to focus more on educating the players and keeping the game going rather than the impact that the fix is going to have on actual gameplay. So let's take a look at the Judging at REL document. I won't spend a bunch of time going through it line by line. After all, it's only 2 pages long, so I feel like anybody who's interested in that sort of thing shouldn't have too hard of a time doing that themselves. But I will call attention to some of the biggest differences between judging at regular and judging at competitive. After about half a page explaining the philosophy, we get to what the Judging at Regular document calls common issues, of which there are 5. Forgetting a triggered ability, seeing a card in the library that the player wasn't legally allowed to see, drawing or otherwise having more cards in your hand than you're supposed to, making an in-game error that doesn't fit into one of these other 3 categories, and violating one of the rules for deck construction. For those who are used to the IPG, those correspond to the infractions it calls missed trigger, looking at extra cards, hidden card error, game rule violation, and deck problem. These are just largely the same as they would be at competitive REL, but I want to highlight a couple of key differences in the policy for missed triggers. The standard for when a trigger is considered missed is basically the same as it is at competitive REL. If it isn't acknowledged by the time a player would have had to make a choice, or the trigger would have had some other visible in-game effect. The fix has 2 major differences. First, for triggered abilities that use the word may, you assume the player chose not to perform it. To be clear, this is not how it works at competitive REL. Whether a triggered ability uses the word may or not has absolutely no bearing on the fix there, a fact that I find confuses many players when their protests of "it's not a may" fall on deaf ears. This is probably the part of the jar that I deviate the most from when I'm judging. The second difference is that other triggered abilities are always put on the stack unless the judge feels doing so would be too disruptive to the game. The competitive REL fix of allowing the opponent to decide whether the triggered ability is put on the stack is certainly more fair. The potential for a player to gain advantage from a missed trigger is minimized, but at the same time, letting people get the effects of the cards is generally more fun, especially if the player is still getting used to Magic's timing and priority system, which can at times have non-obvious effects on when a player officially has to announce their triggered abilities. Well, after the common issues, there's a short section on generally unwanted behaviors, which include things like not shuffling enough, playing too slowly, soliciting or providing strategic information to another player, showing up late to a round, and using random chance or some form of inducement to decide a game or match result. Now remember that to be considered a generally unwanted behavior, the infracting player cannot know that what they're doing is against the rules. Intentionally doing any of these when you know that they're wrong or trying to trick your opponent into doing one of them is instead considered a serious problem, which we'll get to later. Now this section is where the most difference between competitive and regular REL exists. If you're familiar with the IPG, you know that competitive REL penalties for these sorts of things are quite stiff, generally involving a game loss or even worse. This is because such infractions seriously impact the proceedings or the integrity of the event. The jar does provide for a game loss for generally unwanted behaviors, but only if the behavior is repeated. Giving out game losses can be the most fair way to handle some infractions, but it certainly isn't very fun, especially if, as we're assuming is the case here, the infracting player had no idea that they were breaking the rules at all. Finally, we have infractions that the jar terms serious problems. These are exactly what it says on the tin. Disqualifying someone is also never fun, but just because we're judging at regular REL doesn't mean we can look the other way when a player is cheating, stealing, or engaging in aggressive, violent, harassing, or abusive behavior. These are serious problems at any level of play, and they must be dealt with accordingly. To close out, here's a few examples of what judging looks like at regular REL. All of these are from the True Stories collection, and they're taken from my own personal experience judging at regular REL events. For the first one, I was in the middle of deciding which creatures to attack with at the beginning of my combat step, and I heard a player call for a judge, so I paused my match and I went to go answer that question. Yes, that's a difference, and it's a pretty huge one. Obviously, at competitive REL, the judge cannot participate as a player, but at regular REL, this is allowed. I remember when they made this change and being pretty pleased with it. Almost every judge was a Magic player before being certified, and that means, well, A lot of us love playing Magic too. In cases where the stakes are low enough to merit playing at regular REL, why force people to choose between judging and playing? Next up, I get to the table and it's two of our regulars. One of them tells me that he forgot to exile a sorcery after he flashed it back a couple of turns ago. I tell him to get good scrub and suggest that he try reading the friendly cards the next time, because he's a friend of mine. At a competitive REL event, this sort of comment would be completely inappropriate, even if it would make things more fun for my friend, because it works against the judge's role of being a neutral arbitrator. During gameplay, it's important to treat all players exactly the same, even in straightforward calls, to avoid any hint of bias. At a regular REL event, judges still serve the same function, of course, but since the focus on calls is on education and fun rather than enforcement, joking with the players is generally something that adds to the experience rather than subtracting from it. I feel this should go without saying, but I'll also mention that this is not something that you should bring to every call. This sort of humor would not be appropriate, for example, if you didn't have a good pre-existing relationship with the players involved. Finally, this last one comes from the Journey into Nyx pre-release. Now, a bit of background, that set and the previous two were the home of the Theros gods. There's one for every color and 2-color combination, which works out to 15 total, exactly the same as the number of cards in a pack. Well, at the time, there were 15 cards in a pack, and that's not counting the token. Boxes also used to have 36 packs in them too, by the way. So anyway, someone in marketing thought it would be a cool gimmick if they seeded some of the Journey into Nyx packs to be God packs, that is, one of each of the 15 God cards. And it just so happened that a player, a pre-release that I was judging, opened one of these as part of his sealed pool. He called a judge and asked if he could really play them all. Now, in cases where a pack has an abnormal distribution of rarities, the head judge can choose to either let the pack play or else replace it. If this was competitive REL, I would have 100% replaced the pack. Having an extra 14 mythic rares in your pool tends to skew things. That said, since this was a regular REL event, I let the player keep that pack in his pool, and I can confirm he had a blast playing 5-color gods. That's all I have for you today. How did you do? Thank you again to all of my lovely supporters on Patreon. Join me again next time for another daily ruling. Until then, I hope you have a great day.